Okay, we are live. Hopefully, let me know if you can't hear me. So, I was pretty shocked. I have to say, pretty shocked. Um, hell yeah, hello, we are live. I was pretty shocked to see the comments reported in the Independent, attributed to Maiwenn Besco, the director of Johnny Depp's film, Jeanne Du Barry. You probably remember her from Cannes Film Festival. She was on the red carpet and in the audience and on the stage with Johnny Depp at times talking about their film. And there had been reports, of course, during the making of this movie, there had been reports that they had screaming matches or fights on set, that Johnny Depp was late a lot, that he was driving her crazy, et cetera, et cetera. And so, it's not like it was completely shocking to get an article talking about this notion that there were problems on set and that Johnny Depp might not have been, absolutely perfect in his behavior at times. I'm not saying that, I'm not saying I thought those allegations were correct or incorrect or whatever, but I'm saying, it's no shock in and of itself. But what's really surprising to me is really how blunt. If this interview is being depicted accurately, this interview between the journalist at the Independent and Maiwenn Besco, the director of Johnny Depp's film, if this interview is being depicted correctly, presented correctly, and I know that's a huge if, and I see, the number one comment here, even before we got started, from someone is pointing out that they think, saying that they think this is false and clickbaity from the Independent, and I'm looking at the article, right now. Um, Maybe so. We'll talk about that in a minute. I am, however, I'm just going to be honest. I am, however, skeptical of the notion that all of the bad things that she said about him in this interview were made up. And here's the thing: I know journalism, I know it sucks. I know we've been talking now for years and years about how shitty, how awful, how malicious the journalism has been toward Johnny Depp over the years, really, since Amber Heard accused him of what she accused him of. And I know, and I agree, and I'll be the first person to stand up and talk about how ridiculous the media have been and continue to be on this and many other topics. However, there's still a difference between misinterpreting someone's words and then actually relaying them in quotation marks. And I understand, as you read through this interview, and I'm going to go through it in a minute, that there were plenty of times where the journalist relayed or paraphrased what Maiwenn was saying, and that could be a lot more suspect. But there were a hell of a lot of like actual quotes and quotation marks, just flat out by Maiwenn, attributed to Maiwenn, flat out just accusing Johnny Depp of being kind of a nightmare on set in various ways. And I understand she said other things about him that were nice and he's a genius and all of that. So my intent here is not to get on here and talk about, oh my God, suddenly we've discovered that Johnny Depp can be a problem on set. I mean, I think we kind of knew, for instance, that the lateness, that's a significant character flaw for him. And we'll talk about that in a little while. But all of these people, just like all of us, just like me, we all have character flaws. And I think that I was just surprised. So I wasn't surprised to hear that Johnny Depp, in some ways gave the director a hard time on set in various ways. I was just surprised that she was so blunt about it. And it is newsworthy and it is catching a lot of attention. And so I just have to say here at the outset, before we get into this, I understand that there are a number of people in the Justice for Johnny Depp community and a number of Depp supporters and a number of people who support my channel who believe, and I'm not being sarcastic here at all, I'm just flat out stating what I think you believe that we should never say anything negative about Johnny Depp and that we should basically be almost like a PR wing for Johnny Depp. And I'm not saying actually that that's a terrible idea. I think that if Johnny Depp hadn't had, his supporters over the years, things would have been a lot more difficult for him than they already were. I mean, just the number of you who went out and bought Sauvage, that cologne, I think made it a huge hit. I really do. So I'm not even saying that I disagree with that perspective, but that's just not my intention. And it was never my intention getting into this. And it's funny because I've kept telling people over the years, actually, I didn't start a YouTube channel to be Johnny Depp's cheerleader. Actually, I didn't start a YouTube channel to be Marilyn Manson's cheerleader, et cetera, et cetera. And people, a lot of people don't believe me. But then when I turn around and I criticize Johnny Depp or I criticize Marilyn Manson, then there's always this contingent of people like, oh my God, oh my God, what's she doing? Well, duh, I told you I didn't get into this to be the cheerleaders for these guys, even though I think that they're both falsely accused. And I think overall, I think that they're good people, et cetera. Okay. So this is not some like me trying to play into some takedown of Johnny Depp and whatever. I just thought it was interesting the director came out and said things this bluntly because most of the time people are not this blunt in the entertainment industry. It's all about image and protecting your image and, sucking up to other people so that they can, help you down the road or return favors or whatever. And so it's just, you don't always see a director come out and say, to paraphrase, this guy was kind of a nightmare to work with in a lot of ways. And when they do say it, it is newsworthy. So I don't think, personally, I feel fine about talking about this. And in fact, I think if you will listen to me, by the time we get to the end of this, you'll see that I don't have anything terrible to say about Johnny Depp, but I would like to talk about some of these topics, such as his habitual lateness, and also talk about, back when I started my channel, I was really into psychoanalyzing a lot of these people. And I think actually that there are a lot of reasons for us to be sympathetic to Johnny Depp for his, for one thing, chronic lateness, because it actually is indicative of some deeper like traumas and issues and what have you. But at any rate, I just want to say from the outset too, before we get into this, I totally believe that Amber Heard's allegations against Johnny Depp were a hoax, and I'm totally on Team Depp. And I think overall he's a very good guy, and I think there's a lot of evidence for thinking that. And you remember Amber Heard hired a private investigator, and the investigator ended up talking about this. She hired a private investigator to try to dig up dirt on Johnny Depp. And as you'll remember, he went around to everybody he could with any associations with Johnny Depp. And he came back to Amber Heard and he told her, I'm sorry, I can't find anything. Everybody loves the guy. So we all know that it's there. I did I did a short but intricate documentary on Depp's innocence. It's linked below. Check it out. And by the way, linked below in the description, not in the comments yet, but I'll put it down there after this video. And by the way, to the people who got upset that I attached my video to Stephen Duder's announcement about Jeanne Du Barry, sorry. Okay, I see why it annoyed you. My thinking was that there are still a hell of a lot of people who think that Johnny Depp is guilty or think it was some kind of mutual toxic thing, and that a lot of them might be looking at these types of Twitter posts. And so it'd be nice, since that's already in people's heads, be a nice place to put my video that I spent a hell of a lot of time making trying to vindicate Johnny Depp. I did not anticipate that people would see it as just sort of a blatant, attention grab. But you know what? Maybe there's some of that in it too. I don't think, to be honest with you, that there are a hell of a lot of people who do YouTube who aren't trying to get attention for some sort of self-serving reason. I just don't think there's that much altruism out there, honestly, on social media or on YouTube. But to those of you who have been promoting Johnny Depp and or his innocence with completely blameless, unself-motivated, completely altruistic intentions, then good for you. You win the good person award. But I'm not going to be able to get that. Sorry. Okay, so let's talk about this. Those of you who are still hanging on. And by the way, hello to my mods. I don't recognize you enough. Rebel Bird, I see you there. Hello. Vanessa, hello. Also to AJ, this was last minute. A lot of people don't know. And because now I'm not doing a regular live stream, I don't have any expectation of my mods doing this work for me. Like, I don't even notify them beforehand because I'm like, if you want to, great. If not, great. But I really appreciate you. And then I don't know if Laura B's here or not today either. But at any rate, thanks to my mods. So I want to get the timeline straight because I see people posting this interview with this video interview with the director, with Maiwenn, in which she is denying allegations of there being fights on set. Now, can someone tell me, when did that interview come out? Is that something that she's just done recently? Like after doing this interview from what, a day or two ago? Or is that something from a long time ago? And I'm not suggesting that she's changed her mind. I'm just trying to get the timeline clear. So, um, somebody let me know what the timeline is. Like, when did that interview with her on camera where she's saying, no, there weren't fights, and yes, we do a movie again if the script were right, that I've been seeing some of you post. Um, can someone give me a link to that? And can you also tell me what the timeline is? Okay, so I'll get to that in a little while. And mods, if you see someone posting this stuff, will you let me know also if I'm not noticing it? Okay. Oh, okay. Rebel Bird says Laura B dropped the link for the Maiwenn interview where she disputes the representation of her words. Oh, okay, cool. I'm gonna go back and look for that for a second here. Here we go. Here's the interview. So I tell you what, let's go ahead and look at that since we've got it. All right, get that out of the way, and then we can talk about how it relates to then the interview that she just did. Laura B, do you know when this interview was? Was it recent? Anyway, someone can let me know. And yeah, I see this comment here. Red Moon says, in France, Maiwenn is not appreciated. She has a huge ego. Okay, I do want to talk about her too. Trying to get all dimensions of this because she certainly comes across as a woman who could be very difficult. And in fact, what was interesting is in the Independent article, you might have noticed, it also talks about how she's scarier than Johnny Depp. So exactly. We've got big egos here. Okay. All right. Laura B says that the interview is not so recent. Okay. That's what I thought. So just understand the interview that we're about to watch. This happened some time ago. And the most recent interview we have from her is the one that came out in the Independent where she's saying some bad things about him and other good things. So just to get the timeline straight, it doesn't invalidate what she said further in the past, but it is good to know what someone's most recent take on something is, if we're being honest. Okay. Give me a second here to find this and share this. Oh, it's not letting me click on it, Laura B. Hold on a second. I'm going to go away for 1 second, y'all. Don't go away. Hey, I know this is annoying, Laura B. Can you send it to me on Twitter? You don't have to do it right now. We'll come back to this. I'm going to go ahead then and jump in with the, because for some reason I'm not able to click on it. I'm going to go ahead and jump in with this. So this came out a day or two ago. I think it was actually maybe within the last 24 hours. Yeah, they posted it. It says 11 hours ago on the Independent. And I actually want to read through the whole thing because she did say a number of really good things about Johnny Depp in this recent interview as well. And also, I want to point out when we're getting direct quotations from her, from Maiwenn, and when it's the reporter telling us things, because at times that can be not so accurate. All right. So the first thing that you notice is the title. It says, Maiwenn on directing Johnny Depp's comeback, quote, in quotation marks, the crew were afraid of him. Now, I know that this, out of everything, sounds the worst because anytime you have the term fear, then people think, oh, someone's scary or whatever. And I don't think that this is what she meant. So you have to remember that this is a woman who, while very eloquent, speaking multiple languages, her English is, and you can just, see it when she talks and so forth, that her English is not perfect. It's good for someone for whom it's not a first language, but it's not perfect. And there's a definite impreciseness there. So to say that they're afraid of someone, when you look deeper into the interview, particularly at the context, it's clear that she's not saying afraid, like, oh my God, this guy is violent, or oh my God, this guy is a bad guy, or I'm actually like really scared that he's going to flip out or do something or whatever. I really don't get that sense. I think probably the better term there would be to say that the crew were anxious around him. But for whatever reason, that's not the word that is chosen here. So yeah, Rebel Bird says, I think she probably meant intimidated because of a huge celebrity. Yeah, and that might even be a better way of interpreting it. I want to get again into the context of it and then we can see better. But yeah, so I don't see anything. I do think that the Independent article is a hit piece to the extent, to agree with one of you earlier. I do think it is a hit piece to the extent that they take the most salacious expression, the crew were afraid of him, and something that really doesn't make sense given the context, and then they make that their opening line. And you keep seeing that, unfortunately, with the media. You keep seeing that replicated. that is the line that keeps getting presented in the titles of these different articles on this interview. And I really have to walk a fine line with the YouTube, getting back to my practice. I have to walk a fine line between putting a thumbnail and a title out there that is going to be blunt enough and direct enough to get people's attention, but at the same time, not wanting to pass along some of the distorted PR that I'm seeing, right? And so, like, I was tempted to say something extent of like, crew afraid of Johnny Depp on set, or something a little more dramatic, or Johnny Depp, a nightmare on set, question mark, or whatever. But I'm like, no, no, I guess what I'm trying to tell you is I really do try to think through these things and the ethics of it and come up with what I think is a good solution. And so, my title is what it is, and I don't think it's anything particularly damaging. But anyway, my point just being that I think it's really disingenuous, this repeating of this term, afraid of him. Okay. So here's the article. The French director, writer, actor Maiwenn says she has no regrets about casting the canceled Johnny Depp in her historical costume drama, Jeanne Du Barry. Yet she admits that during the shoot, Depp wanted to be treated as an icon, quote, all of the time. Now, here's a great example, I think, of where we can be suspicious of what The Independent is writing, because they only put quotes around where it says where she says all the time, and they don't put quotes around the part about him being expecting to be treated as an icon throughout the shoot. So what that means is that's at least it's a paraphrase of what Maiwenn is saying, and it may actually be a distortion. Again, like, if we don't trust the media, we know that they write a lot of hit pieces. They're wanting to be salacious. Maiwenn ended up actually storming out of this interview because she got so sick of this interviewer, right? So there's certainly reasons to doubt how they're paraphrasing her, right? So then another direct quote from her: wouldn't do what the script demanded, unquote, and that the crew were, quote, afraid of him, unquote, or just afraid, actually. Afraid is just in quotation marks there. So I'm kind of confused now by this article, because in the title, you see, it says, it puts the crew were afraid of him. It puts that entire phrase in quotation marks, as if to suggest that that is what Maiwenn is saying. But then, and this is where it's helpful, to be a critical reader, then when you get to the actual reference in the article about fear, notice how they just put quotation marks around afraid and nothing else. So now I'm thinking, well, what's going on there? What did she really say, right? Okay, continuing on. She also says that when journalists like me concentrate on Depp rather than the film's working class heroine, Jeanne, it irks her. Maiwenn once grabbed and spat at a journalist whom she felt had betrayed her. And that's a whole other thing. Maybe we could talk about it toward the end. And then it says, I'm sure Depp can be scary, but whisper it, the gorgeous Maiwenn can be scary too. All right, so that's where they say it. That she's, so basically, in her own way, they're insinuating that she's a piece of work, right? She is a force. And so definitely any movie set where you've got Johnny Depp and you've got this woman, you can reckon that you've got some powerful egos, right? That are very intently focused on the creative process, and that does breed a lot of tension. And this is something that if you have ever tried to collaborate with people on an artistic project that you all or you both really believe in, it is one of the most frustrating experiences and one of the most, at times, infuriating experiences you can have. And I totally understand how bands break up and how there's, come to blows at times, band members, in rock groups or whatever, about songs or about, who's going to be the big person or presentation or whatever. And I totally see how on movie sets you could have a dynamic of tension. And when I say ego, I don't mean often in the most obvious sense of like, oh, he's just such an asshole. He's so full of himself. He doesn't think about anyone else. I don't mean it that way. I mean people who, because of what they have achieved in life, and also because of, in some ways, the superiority of who they are. Like, not everybody can act like Johnny Depp. Not everybody can direct films or whatever. So there's a certain sense, a certain confidence in one's abilities and in one's judgment and in one's artistic judgment that people acquire after some time of being recognized stars and recognized authorities in their field, right? So some of the things that I say on Twitter and terms that I throw out, I like to come on here and unpack because I don't think people understand exactly what I'm saying. Um, so, I made a mention today about Marilyn Manson and how some of the things that I had heard about over the years about behavior, egotistical or prima donna behavior. Basically, I was suggesting that not all of that's been positive, or not all of that do I think is great. But and I wasn't talking there about like horrible abusive behavior or scary or anything like that. But I'm just saying that the more that you look into what goes on with a lot of these bands and these rock stars, the creative process is just so difficult. And people who are very sure of themselves and of their abilities and of their insights, and also maybe are stressed out or whatever, at times you've got issues. And God knows Johnny Depp, when this movie was made, he was going through one of the toughest times in his life. This movie was made after he had just lost the UK verdict, the UK trial. And that was really, as you'll remember, that was a low in this whole multi-year saga with Amber Heard. That was the low, because immediately after he lost that, a lot of people turned around and said, see, he's guilty. Amber Heard was out there rejoicing and, throwing her party with her big balloons and stuff. I'll never forget the expression on her face. Never forget the expression on her face the day that Johnny Depp lost that UK verdict. And she was, I guess, having a party because she had friends and stuff bringing her like congratulations balloons and stuff. And so there was a photo. Some of you remember this. There was a photo that was taken of her, I think, holding one of these balloons or whatever outside her house, and the paparazzi apparently congratulated her, or maybe she even hired them, but we know she does that, right? But the paparazzi were congratulating her on her big win, and she was just beaming, the smile of someone who has escaped disaster by the skin of her teeth, has snatched victory from the jaws of defeat, at least at that moment, it seemed. Man, hated that picture. Hated it. But Johnny Depp, that had just happened to him. And then he had just been dumped by those wusses at Warner Brothers. And I mean, it was just bad. It was just bad. And so that's when he started making this movie, apparently. So God knows there's plenty of reason for him to be having a hard time. Okay, keep going. I'm going to skip the biographical stuff about Maiwenn and just get into her talking about Johnny Depp. So we'll do that. Just a second. And they do talk a lot about Jeanne, like the character Jeanne Du Barry. That was one of the things that Maiwenn got upset about later in the interview, is that she said that they weren't actually talking about it. It does seem like they did talk about it. But I understand she gets tired of these interviews. She gets tired of the questions and them throwing all this stuff, personal stuff, in her face and everything. Okay, so here we go. Says there's a bleak scene where Jeanne Du Barry discovers that the king has a dark side. He's taken another lover. Jeanne is hurt. And then this is where we start. That scene, says Maiwenn excitedly, is a direct example of how she used the power struggles between her and Depp as an opportunity to improve the film. She claims Depp, now this is all paraphrased so far, she claims Depp frequently came on set having rewritten the script, saying, quote, now, this is not the truth, this is not how it happened, unquote. That day, now back in quotes, she's saying this, Johnny came with a new version of the script and I wasn't happy with it. It didn't work. So I shot it without making the changes he wanted, which he took as an insult, unquote. So she's saying here, this is all in quotation marks, she's saying that he showed up to work and he had all of his own ideas. This is not uncommon. So again, I don't think this is a big deal. It's not something that is normally, the directors are normally talking about, but it does happen a lot on sets. He came with his own ideas and they didn't work. And so she didn't make the changes he wanted. And then she says he took it as an insult. Now, did he really take it as an insult, or did she interpret that perhaps incorrectly? Who knows, right? And so that's one of the places where this sort of starts to break down. And so I know some of you are saying that Maiwenn in France, again, she's looked upon by a number of people very negatively, that she has a very problematic personality, and she hit a journalist, etc. And so I get it. You're saying, maybe this is not correct. Um, okay, throughout the shoot, now we're back in paraphrase. Throughout the shoot, she says, Depp ignored her texts and would only talk to her when his entourage were around. And he often failed to show up on the set. Now, again, this is paraphrase. It's since been reported that in retaliation, Maiwenn would fail to appear the next day. Quote, "This is totally false," yells Maiwenn. Quote, "We were waiting for Johnny a lot of the time, but I was the first arriving on set and the last person to believe." So, what she says here basically, if we're just going by the quotation marks, is that Johnny Depp got insulted when she didn't want to make his changes, in her opinion, and that they were waiting for him a lot of the time. Keep going. Oh, and also now and in the paraphrase, we get this allegation that he ignored her text and he would only talk to her when his entourage were around. So I have some who knows if that's true again, but I have some thoughts on that. We'll discuss in a little while. Okay, keep going. Though she admits to cutting some of Depp's dialogue, it wasn't out of spite. Quote, "There was no time for rehearsals. I asked for time, but for whatever reason, he wasn't available. He had a coach, but he couldn't work with her beforehand. So, okay, I discovered his accent wasn't perfect. So a few times I decided to cut his lines, but that also happens with French actors. It happens." Now, to me, the main allegations here are that he apparently wouldn't rehearse ahead of time. She says, I wanted rehearsals. I asked for time. For whatever reason, he wasn't available. And then he had a coach, but he didn't work. He wouldn't work with the coach beforehand. So again, we have to wonder on the most negative way of depicting this would be that Johnny Depp's attitude was basically like, I'm a big star. I shouldn't have to do all these rehearsals. I don't feel like it or whatever. And so he just kind of left him hanging in a way. Or we could think, well, his life was really crazy. As we just said, he was at a particular low point, going through all of this, going through all this hell. So, yes, on this film, he was not able to do the rehearsals and prepare as much as he might have. Or it could be that Maywin is just totally making this up. I just don't think, though, I really don't think, even as shitty as journalism is today, I really don't think that that this interviewer is just making up all of this. I don't. Now, is Maywin correct? I don't know about that. And I know there's a lot of paraphrasing going on at times. And so I would imagine probably we're getting like maybe like a halfway correct impression. But it really does seem when you look at the court evidence, stuff that's come to light in various depositions and in interviews over the years, and also in conversations that we heard Johnny Depp having on tape with Amber Heard, where he admitted that lateness could be a problem for him. That was a struggle. And I know people say, well, he's just saying that to appease her or whatever. Okay, but it sure kept coming up a lot in these trials and various testimonies by people associated with Depp or worked for him or whatever, that he was really egregiously, that is his pattern, to be significantly egregiously late or to not show up on the sets of movies. I'm not saying universally, I'm not saying every movie he's ever done, and maybe it's gotten worse when he's had deeper substance abuse problems or going through worse times in his life or whatever. But I remember when Pirates of the Caribbean, the last one happened, the one where, the infamous Amber Heard situation with the finger and everything, during that shoot. And this was discussed in some of the court documents and the depositions as well. But I remember reporting even from the time period that it was that the director was having such a hard time getting Johnny Depp not only to not show up super late on set, but actually also to even get him to show up. And then, in fact, the director would have to send like a scout, to go look at his house and see if he saw like basically like any signs of movement or could we expect him sometime today. And so I just really think I don't have absolute proof or whatever, and I don't think it's like the worst character flaw in the world, honestly. But I really do think that he has a significant problem with being late or with not showing up. And my reading, and then also what if what Maywin is saying is accurate. Well, let's look a little more of what she says. All right, here's another direct quote. It says, Maiwenn looks at me, quote, I have to be honest, it's difficult to shoot with him. All the crew were scared because he has a different kind of humor, and we didn't know if he was going to be on time or if he was going to be okay to say his lines. I mean, even if he was there on set on time, the crew were afraid of him. Again, we don't know exactly what afraid means. I read it as anxious. Some of you might read it as intimidated by his stature and his movie celebrity, his movie stardom or whatever. I do have to admit that I read it a bit more problematically than that, which is to say that there was some behavior that they were seeing, and she doesn't get specific about what it is. There, I think that she's suggesting something at one point, but I don't want to say it outright because I don't know. But there was something, it sounds like, in his behavior where people felt like he was not really, my words, on his game with this performance and with the way that he was showing up and not ready, fully ready to go, or kind of off or whatever. Now, she did mention that he has a different kind of humor, but I'm trying to understand how that could translate to people being anxious around him on set, a different kind of humor. I don't know. So I don't know what to make of the thing about the different kind of humor. Unless she's using the term, here's the problem again with a non-native speaker, unless she's using the term humor to mean something else. Humor can also mean emotions, like, like not just like funny, but like what state of mind you're in. So she could have been making reference here not to, oh, he's telling jokes or whatever, but that he showed up in a kind of a state of mind that people were kind of put off, like anxious about. All right. Again, not anxious that he's going to like hurt anyone or be violent or anything like that, right? What we're talking about here basically is movie star prima donna behavior and rock star prima donna behavior. And if you look at, there are lots of movie stars who were geniuses, and she even uses this term genius later in the interview, but there were lots of movie stars who were geniuses and who gave their directors a really hard time. Apocalypse Now, one of the, my opinion, best movie ever made, and certainly best war movie ever made. But you can look at the documentary Hearts of Darkness, made by Francis Ford Coppola's wife, and she just died recently. Rest in peace. But you can look at the documentary about the making of Apocalypse Now, and you can see how much trouble Marlon Brando and Dennis Hopper gave Coppola on that film. Like, just driving him to the point of craziness. Brando was supposed to lose a lot of weight because the character of Kurtz is actually supposed to be emaciated. So if you read the novel Heart of Darkness, Kurtz has some kind of like jungle fever, seriously, literally, something like malaria or something. And he gets so skinny, he looks skeletal. And that's like a big part of his characterization in Heart of Darkness, the novel that Apocalypse Now is based on. And so Marlon Brando was supposed to lose weight. He was supposed to be skinny, ideally, and he shows up fat. I mean, he's not like, oh my God, jaw open, obese, fat, or whatever, but like, he's kind of fat. And he refused to read the script. He refused to read the book the movie was based on. He improvised most of his lines, and it ended up working out, great. But I mean, Coppola was just like, what? He was sullen, he was difficult. And then you had Dennis Hopper, who was on LSD the whole time, and who knows what else. And, also didn't read the script, didn't learn his lines. And two, I think acting geniuses who made that film. So, and Coppola he kept them on because he knew it was worth it, right? And I think that's the thing with Maiwenn, is she can complain about, well, he was difficult. Well, insinuated he didn't show up a lot, et cetera, et cetera. But she knew there was a reason why she wanted Johnny Depp for that role. That's because he is an amazing actor. And she says here later on in the interview, a genius and so forth. So, Marilyn Monroe, it was almost impossible at times to get her on set, particularly in her later years. So I'm just saying this is like a thing with a lot of people. Once they reach the top echelon, and they realize that the world really does kind of stop for them or wait for them, then they can develop, unfortunately, some patterns of behavior that are not ideal. And so when I say egotistical, in the Twitter post that I made where I said Johnny Depp's behavior as reported in this seems egotistical, I don't mean egotistical in the sense of like some like awful tyrant or someone who doesn't give a shit about other people. Johnny Depp apparently is one of the most generous celebrities, one of the most generous people in Hollywood, one of the most generous people that a lot of people have known, period. And we know this, it's been confirmed in various ways. But people are extremely complex and artists are extremely complex. And while someone might not show overt signs of egotism, there are more sort of passive aggressive, less overt ways in which one basically asserts, you have to wait for me. I am the priority. I mean, y'all, I just can't, it's hard to interpret it any other way unless Johnny Depp's substance abuse problem was so bad at this point. And I don't know, I can't remember if he was supposed to be sober or what, but unless his substance abuse problem was so bad at this point that he just often couldn't show up there, couldn't make it there on time. But but it seems like, looking back, this allegation of being chronically late and at times not showing up, it's dogged him in other films where, he was going through more sober periods, right? So my point being, I definitely think that this is just a negative aspect of his character, but I'm also saying that I don't think that being a celebrity and being at the top of your craft like he is, and I don't think that makes it any easier because people really do have to wait on you, and they did. They did, right? Um, when to get a little psychoanalytic here, I have not done this in a while in my videos. When I first started making videos, I used to very regularly actually do psychoanalytic assessments of Johnny Depp and his relationship with Amber Heard and what I thought was going on there, and with other people I've covered because I'm really interested in psychoanalysis. But I haven't talked about it in a while. But when you see a symptom in someone that is a common characteristic of their behavior, then you ask yourself several questions. You ask, first of all, what is that doing for them? Because every behavior that we engage in, even if it is self destructive, even if it is negative, we're engaging in it because it is doing something for us. And so, I've noticed this in myself, not in relation to lateness, but something else. I tend to dwell on or really think about a lot dark aspects of life. I think about death every day, not just like I think about it, it passes my mind, but like I really like at time, probably every night when I go to sleep, I would say the last 10 minutes before I go to sleep, or before I can get myself into a mode to go to sleep, I really think a lot about this is what it'll be like to die. One day you'll close your eyes and darkness will really come and you'll be gone somewhere mysterious or you won't or whatever. And I freak myself out every night I go to bed. And I think a lot, I focus a lot on the tragedies in the world and read a lot of, and probably some of you do this too, read a lot of news that doesn't help us. And, and looking at the kids bombed in Gaza and whatever, and reading stories about traumatized Israeli hostages and what have you. And I had to face the fact, and it's not like it's changed my behavior, but I had to face the fact that one of the reasons I was doing that, because I like to tell myself, well, I'm just this afflicted, depressed person. I'm clinically depressed. Everyone in my family is depressed. I've been depressed, ever since I could remember as the youngest child and as a young child. And yes, all of that's true. But I also have to admit at certain times that I feed into this, even though it brings me a lot of difficulty and I'm miserable being depressed. But at the same time, I have to look at, well, why do you watch all those horror films, all the depressing stuff? Why do you pay so much attention to the news? Why do you watch that channel with the kids dying in Gaza or reading about Israeli hostages or what? Like, why do you do all that? And I had to face the realization, I had to come to the realization that part of it was I am so bored often with life. I suffer from chronic boredom, and I've talked about it, like just miserable boredom, that sometimes feeling bad is better than feeling bored. And you might say, what the hell does any of this have to do with Johnny Depp? But I'm just saying that break any negative behavior that you're engaging in, no matter how self-destructive, break it down, and you will find that it's doing something for you. And so, and then also you look at a psychoanalytic perspective would say also you look at the childhood roots of this behavior. And, Johnny Depp has talked a lot about to paraphrase, about how miserable his childhood was, about how, to quote him now, there was constant pain. His mother, because his mother was constantly abusive and his dad wasn't there, or his dad ended up leaving or what have you. And, but that his mother just really put him and his siblings through hell growing up. And what happens in situations like that, and I can relate, not with my mom or whatever, but my dad was a pretty tough time, and not on the level of Johnny Depp's mother, but a pretty tough time. But I can relate to an extent, probably a number of you can. When you grow up with a parent like that, that puts you through hell, whether it's physical or emotional or what have you, there is this part of you that wants to shut down or destroy yourself in protest. Yeah, I don't mean like self-immolation or something like that, although I guess people could commit suicide, so to show their parent or whatever. But I'm talking about, I think at times there is such a deep sense of being wounded by one's upbringing and being wounded by the person that one loved the most. In his case, his mother. It's supposed to be like the mother-son bond is supposed to be like so tender and strong and beautiful and all of that. And I think there was a part of him that was so wounded by that, that an attitude develops of like, I'm not going to play your game. And I may not be strong enough or big enough to fight you fairly or to defend myself, but I can get sullen and I can get really incalcitrant and I can give you a hard time in other ways, in passive aggressive ways. And I could be totally, totally off here. And so if Johnny Depp happens to see this, he might get a chuckle at me just spooling out ridiculous theories. But I think that Johnny Depp is extremely wounded. And I mean, this part's no brainer. Of course, he's extremely wounded, but I think he's extremely wounded by his mother. And I see in someone who is chronically, habitually late, I see in someone a desire to not fully play the game the way other people want it played, because there's a part of him that's angry, and that's the passive aggressive way of expressing it, particularly with authority figures. Okay, and here's what's interesting to me is that Maiwenn, in this interview, she talks about how before she and Johnny Depp actually started working on the film, that their relationship was great. She said they were texting. I'm not going to have time to finish the full article. Sorry, I'm always long-winded. But she said that they were, and this is a direct quote, they were texting a lot and, and laughing and joking or what have you, right? And then if according to the article, then when they started shooting, then she could not text him anymore and he wouldn't talk to her unless his entourage was around. And it's almost like when they started shooting, and I understand some of you hate this. I see some of the comments. I understand some of you, think that it's just wrong and inappropriate of me to even be doing this. But again, that's great for y'all. Some of you who want to be 100% Johnny Depp promoters, but that's not what I'm doing. But it's interesting to me that they had a great relationship with open communication, everything great. But then she alleges he shut down when filming began. And you see this sort of insularity coming on. He doesn't want to text. He doesn't want to interact unless his entourage is around, kind of as a cushion or a barrier or whatever. I'm saying this. Very, resistant to her point of view as the director on the film, and getting insulted when she, and trying to change the film in a number of ways and getting insulted when she doesn't want to go along with his changes, and being late and not showing up. To me, it is a kind of a passive aggressive, totally unconscious indication of someone who is still deeply wounded and is unable to connect in a fully healthy way with an authority figure. I could be totally wrong, but that's what I see. And the fact that it happens on so many films, because the director is an authority figure, the fact that it happens on so many films, it just makes me think, there's something there. But I could be totally wrong. Could be totally wrong. Um, you know, Marilyn Manson, who I don't think has a reputation for being late. I don't think that I've read that as something that he does a lot or has done a lot or anything. So I'm not talking about lateness. But I remember seeing an interview with him where he made a point of noting, kind of complaining about the fact that because his birthday occurred near Christmas time, growing up as a child, he never got to really fully, and I'm paraphrasing here, but growing up as a child, he never got to fully experience, I guess, the joy or the fun of having a birthday and then having Christmas, because birthday was always jammed into Christmas celebrations, and he didn't get as many, or he didn't get double gifts. He just got, I guess, gifts for both holidays, right? And what have you. And there's nothing wrong with saying that, or whatever, right? But sort of detected, hearing that, and the way that he talked about it, as like, this is still something this guy's holding on to. Like, a lot of people aren't even really thinking about, their birthdays, experiences growing up and things like that, much less like still hung up on the fact that the two holidays ran together, and so they didn't get as many gifts as they would have gotten otherwise, or as much recognition as they would have gotten otherwise. And I'm not saying any of that to make it seem like he's a bad person, because I have the same hangups in other ways, right? So again, this is not about judgment, it's about understanding behavior in people who are just flawed, just like I'm flawed. But there was just something that sort of came through in what he was saying, that this was something that he was actually still hung up on. It was still smarting a little, that there was still a little kid inside who didn't feel like he was treated like he should have been treated, and he's sore about it. And again, I don't know, what we could see in Manson's behavior or whatever, how that's expressed or not expressed, whatever. But I'm just saying that when I look at Johnny Depp and Marilyn Manson, I don't think that I think you can see how similar in some ways they are, and why they had a great friendship and everything. Because there are these like strains of their personalities. They both have significant issues with their mother. I mean, this is no secret or anything. It doesn't take Freud. I mean, they've said it multiple times in various ways. And I know Manson ended up, he said, making peace with his mom and stuff, and Johnny Depp as well, which is an interesting character arc for both of them, right? That their relationships with their mothers got healthier in later years. And kudos to that. And I think that's a huge developmental stage, to get to the point where you realize that your parent was fucked up, not because of some personal vendetta they had against you, generally speaking, but just because life is fucked up, they're fucked up, we're all fucked up, right? And so once you get to be the age of your parent, or once you even get to be older and you get into adulthood and you see, oh, I can see why they fucked up so much. This place is a hard fucking game to play. That's true. I have a lot of issues with my dad, but I don't, at least consciously, I don't believe I carry a lot of anger in him. Maybe unconsciously, right? And I express it in ways other than lateness. But I have a lot of issues with my dad, but I don't really feel anger at him anymore, consciously at least, because when I hit adulthood, I realized, man, this is a fucked up place that we're all trapped in. It really is. The world, life, human existence, modern society, all of it. It's a fucked up place, and it will breed, create fucked up behavior and fucked up feelings. So ultimately, that's just kind of where I am on on human behavior. But I do think that when someone, getting back to Depp, who's chronically late, and maybe it's not the explanation I've given, but I do think there's definitely something going on. I don't know what's going on with him in terms of like drinking or substance abuse, or what have you. I'd heard that he was sober, but I don't have like good sources in the, in the Depp world or anything like that. But I don't know. I mean, he talked about in that trial about how basically his entire life, in some form or fashion, I know he was sober for a number of years with Vanessa, but that he had struggled basically with addiction, or he had been, taking substances or whatever. So I don't know. When people go through, and I know this firsthand, when people go through difficult times with substance abuse and stuff, you can see when they're in the really bad periods, when everything sort of starts falling apart. And so I totally understand, and I'm not talking about Jeanne Du Barry, just in general. I totally understand, that maybe this guy was just going through periods where he was just drinking a ton or whatever. And he's talked about, other stuff at times. And so, look, it could just be that simple. But the difference is that normal people who are not celebrities don't have the luxury of falling apart or saying, well, I'll just come to work when I want to come to work. Oh man, which is not his fault either. There is something that happens when people become very famous or very important. There is just a sort of inevitable change that happens. I don't mean they become bad people or whatever, but I'm just saying that they're like you can see like very predictable changes that occur in character. And I think that once you get the sense as a big star that everybody has to wait on you, then, you feel greater liberty to make them wait, basically. Especially if you have some issues perhaps with authority figures or with your mom or whatever. Well, I didn't want to get into the gender thing there, but okay, keep going here. She says a lot of things. She says that she notes that she was impressed by the fact that when she and Depp met up to discuss the movie, that he did not claim to have read her script, and he admitted that Steven, his assistant, had read it, and that he bases his choices on Steven's recommendations. Just talking about it basically that he was being honest, and there was a kind of humility there, and fessing up to that, and not pretending like some idiot narcissist like Amber Heard would, that you'd read the script when you hadn't. Um, she talks about him as a genius. She does say, well, he's in it, basically he's in his own world. It's kind of hard to get through to him at times, but she says he's a genius. And I don't think that she's using that word uh, liberally, or I think she's being very specific there. I think and I think you can look at any of his performances and you can see that. Like even the movies that I don't like, you can see that. Now, toward the end of this interview, the interviewer starts asking her about her own private life. And so, for example, her first husband, she met him when she was 12, and they claim that they started dating when she was 15. I don't believe that. I have no like evidence to the contrary. I just don't believe it. Um, but anyway, so it's an unconventional start to a relationship, and she had a kid when she was 16, and et cetera, et cetera. And then he ended up leaving her for is it Mia Jovovich or however you say her name. And so anyway, that came up, and also that there were allegations against her ex-husband, and that she had gone up to a reporter and slapped the reporter in a restaurant for disclosing some information from the police investigation related to her ex-husband and father of her child. So she didn't like the reporter talking about that. And then she did not like the reporter asking about her sister, another French actress who apparently accused a director of sexual assault or harassment as well. And so, the woman seems like a very strong-willed person who doesn't take any shit from anyone. And it is very possible that she and Johnny Depp, two big egos on set, and he was more difficult to control, and she would have liked being a controlling person herself, perhaps. And and then now she's just basically blowing off some steam, getting a few zingers in. But I'm just telling y'all, you may not like it, and you may not like that she did this interview most recently. You may not like what she said. You may not trust the interviewer or the interviewer's depiction of it. But I find it extremely hard to believe that this is all made up, or that this is all, this journalist distortion. And I do think there's some there. Now, whether or not she's depicting things accurately, I don't know. But whether or not Maiwenn is depicting things accurately, I don't know. But I think, and look, let me say something else. Maiwenn is too savvy. She has had too much experience with the press. Remember, she started doing all this stuff before she was even a teenager. She started acting when she was a child, and she had apparently a very success-obsessed mother who pushed her into it. But she started acting when she was a child, dated this major director, had his kid when she was in her mid-teens. She did all of these movies and has directed lots of things, and she is a middle-aged 40-something woman who has had decades of experience with media and with this profession. What I'm trying to say is, I don't think that she said the things that she's quoted as saying, or the things that she is insinuated as saying. I don't think that she said these things like accidentally. I think that she knew what she was doing. I think was frustrated with Depp during the filming process. And either A, she wants to kind of get some zingers in, just unconsciously make herself feel better, or B, she's just a real straight shooter. And if someone's going to ask her to talk about what it was like to work with Johnny Depp, she's not going to bullshit you. She's going to say he was a handful. He's a genius, and I would work with him again on the right project, but the man was a handful, and he was an obstructionist in various ways and caused me some headaches. So I think that that is fully what she was intending to get across. Now I know that at the end of the interview, if you read it, she ends up leaving. She gets pissed and starts screaming when these personal questions come up that I just talked about. She gets pissed and apparently starts screaming or speaking very strongly to the interviewer and to her friends or whoever's in there with her. I think her PR agent for the film and someone else, and they come over apparently. And so then she stands up, shakes the interviewer's hand, and then walks away. Says she's done. So it definitely ended badly, and she walked out on the interviewer. But I have not seen her come out and rebuke or refute, I should say, the things that were attributed to her in this interview. So I think she meant to say what she said about Johnny Depp, and I think that she does have ambivalent feelings about him and maybe even negative feelings about how things went on set. But to the extent that that means anything, I don't know. Now, let's get to what some of you have been pointing at, talking about, which is the interview that she did some time ago, Maiwenn, where this is what she had to say about working with Johnny Depp. So let me get this on screen, and then we will do this. And if I missed any super chats, I don't expect to get a lot of super chats talking about this. This is not one where I know people are going to be falling all over themselves to give me money. Oh, thank you for spending an hour talking about Johnny Depp's flaws. But you know what? I do what I want to do. I started this to talk about this channel to talk about things that interest me, and you know what? I kind of feel like it gives me, in some ways, more credibility because it should be very obvious to everyone now that I am not just a simp or a suck up to Johnny Depp or Marilyn Manson, both of whom I've criticized multiple times and at times called out for various things. You know, I got upset with Johnny Depp several months ago because I feel, and I talked about this in a stream, because I feel like he should have found some way to stand up for Marilyn Manson a bit now that Johnny Depp has been mostly publicly vindicated. And I just don't understand. Like, they can't even schedule like an alfresco, lunch in LA or something. I don't get it, but whatever. I mean, Marilyn Manson stood up for him a bit, but whatever. Um, but I've criticized both these guys, and really, actually, in the summer, really took Marilyn Manson to the woodshed. I mean, I'm not saying he perceived it that way. He's probably like, whatever, right? But I'm talking about, like, I got pissy and laid out my issues with him, not about his innocence or guilt or anything like that. I think it's a total, the Me Too thing with him is a total scam, just like with Depp. But some frustrations I had the way he was handling things at that point. So, and in the same thing with the politics stuff. I've had over the years, I've had so many Amber Heard stands and Evan Rachel Wood stands accuse me of being this rabid Trump supporter and this rabid right winger. Well, I just wonder how many more pro abortion videos do I have to do calling out the right wing before some of you wake up to the fact that no, actually, I'm not in bed with anybody, any particular party or person or whatever. Okay. Oh, Vanessa, hello. Says, well, I'm here to know more on this movie, Colonel Kurtz. I had good reviews, so thanks for the live. I heard good reviews. I want to talk about the movie in a minute. Actually, I'm losing my voice. But let's go ahead and look at this Maiwenn video. And the sound might be kind of bad. You might have to turn it up. That's just what StreamYard does. When we show things using StreamYard, sometimes it turns it down.
Okay. Some days I play.
Well, you did a fantastic job. It was
Thank you.
beautifully realized. How was the experience of collaborating with Johnny Depp? How did you find that collaboration?
Well, some days absolutely wonderful, and some days it's complicated. But I know the media have made a paper about us when we were not on the good mood, and I don't want them to have the idea of it was a nightmare. I mean, some days it was really great and some days not. But Johnny Depp is not an exception. I mean, all on my movies, we have problem between actors, technician. We spend so much time together, and the pressure is so high.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it's comment on dit, c'est inévitable.
It's inevitable.
Yeah, inevitable to have tension.
Sure.
So Johnny can be adorable, and also he could be hard,
Hmm.
but I am the same and had lots of problem also with technician.
Hmm.
I mean, it's so difficult to make movies right now. Since
Absolutely.
the COVID,
Hmm.
the budget is really lower than before,
Hmm.
and the time that we have to make the movie is smaller. So the pressure is so high.
Sure. There's a lot of
Yes.
creative tension, and
Mm.
everyone's under
Yeah,
financial
it's like we
pressure.
don't
Of
have
course.
any time to think on
Hmm.
the set to maybe, okay, maybe it doesn't work like this. Maybe let's do it another way.
Hmm. Might you work with him again? Would you do it? Do you think you'd work again?
If the script
Hmm.
ask for it, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And what's
Okay, so I think there's several great things there actually that come out in that video. One is, as I said earlier, no offense to her, but this is not someone who is super proficient with the English language, and so she's searching for words at times, and so I again, it means that any direct quote that we got from her in that article, such as when she mentions afraid, we're not exactly sure what that means, right? So, even more than with most people, you cannot take her words perhaps so literally or hear them with the same connotation that we would give them, right? Another thing is that there's definitely no anger expressed in this. There's no undertone of anger or anything at Johnny Depp. Her attitude seems to be like, look, yeah, this happens. You get a pressure cooker environment on a set because it's so hard to make movies, and you have not enough time and a lot going on and these people. And she says, Johnny Depp, he can be hard at times, but then she says, and so can I. So it was her attitude in this was that it was all rather unexceptional. The only thing in this recent interview, again, that I kind of wonder about is that, I mean, this, like I said earlier, this is a woman, Maiwenn, who has been doing this stuff with media for a long time. She knows that they latch on to certain things, and she knew coming into this recent interview that they were wanting to hear some bad stuff about Johnny Depp. And so, again, when you hear her then, especially in some of these direct quotations, when you read it, I should say, in this most recent interview, and she's saying some of these things about Depp, and you think, well, she has to have known that that was going to be the headline. Like, that's the thing, is I just don't think someone is like her can be that naive about the press, because if someone did an interview with me about someone controversial or someone that we know the press dislikes, like with Johnny Depp, I would know right off the bat that any negative thing that I said, that would be the thing to be focused on. That would be focused on. So I can't believe she's that naive where she didn't know that it would generate these kinds of headlines. And so that's where I think, well, either she's got a little bit of like passive aggressive, irritation with him, or more likely she's just a blunt woman who doesn't give a shit. I'm going to sit down for this interview. I'm going to answer the questions until you really piss me off by talking about my private life. I'm going to answer the questions and let the chips fall where they may. And so I'll say some of these things about Depp, and you'll run with your headline and whatever. Maybe that's the attitude. I don't know. Or it could be again that some sleazy journalist just actually totally decontextualized a lot of what she was saying and paraphrased inaccurately and made shit up. It's not beyond the realm of possibility. It isn't, and we'll see. Um, and so that's what I get from that interview. And movies are extremely difficult to make. I've only been on a movie set once. I was an assistant on a movie. I was what do they call it? A script supervisor, which sounds really fancy, but it's definitely not a fancy job. I was a script supervisor on a movie, and like in an official, real movie in Austin. It was a short film though, so you won't recognize it or probably even be able to look it up. It was called The Gardener, but it was like an artsy thing for some film competition. Anyway, the point is, it was this apocalyptic movie about a gardener, actually. But I was on that shoot it was a short shoot. It was just several days, right? And the thing that I came away from that really appreciating is what a time crunch it is. Like, they are just on the clock in such a way that nothing is ever done as the director wants it to be done. Like, the director has a vision, and in the amount of time that the crew and the actors have to execute that vision, they do the best they can. But They don't ever really get it right because there's not enough, exactly as the director wants it, because there's not enough time to get everything right. I mean, just the amount of time y'all setting up lighting, that really amazed me. How much time in the day of a shoot, how many hours were spent just trying to get the lighting decent, you know? And so my point being that I totally see what she's saying about how it's a pressure cooker environment. There's not enough time and people are stressed out. And then you have these big visions, these two people of how they want things to go. And they're both, she said, at times kind of hard people, et cetera. So it makes sense. It makes sense. And so ultimately, I think that this is just going to be kind of a one day news cycle thing, and nobody really cares if a guy is difficult on set or not. The thing that I don't worry about anything, but to the extent that I think, well, it's a shame that this article came out, is just because of the quote about the crew being afraid of him. Because, and again, in that sense, I really agree that these are hit pieces that we're seeing, to take that quote and prioritize it. And, shame on Maiwenn, I think, for not understanding that that's how it would be perceived. But it's hard for me to believe that she's that naive to make a comment. But then again, remember, it was just afraid in quotation marks, in that second instance. So it could just be BS, right? So to that extent, I really think these were hit jobs, and I agree with the first commenter. And I think it's a shame that a number of people will look at the title of that article as it's being now reproduced in multiple different news outlets, that title that article, "Crew Afraid of Him," because unfortunately, I think that a number of people will take it in a way that I'm not sure it was intended, right? Or it was not intended. But then again, people are so over the media. They are so on the side of Johnny Depp. They see through this bullshit so much. I don't think it's even going to have an effect, really. But interesting that Maiwenn put that out there, or put some of it out there. And it definitely is noteworthy when you have, a director talking about conflicts that occurred on set or whatever, even though, as she says, this happens with a lot of actors and it's nothing particularly extraordinary. So to me, like I said, the most interesting thing when I look at this is the indication of Johnny Depp having an issue with being late and not showing up. And we all have character flaws. And I would say most of us have character flaws that are much deeper than tardiness. So, anyway, Johnny Depp, he is innocent. He did not do all that shit that Amber Heard accused him of. I have a link to my documentary where I lay out all of that below, and references to other channels that you can check out if you want to see more on this. Also, my Depp versus Heard playlist, where I made like 150 videos talking about his innocence. And if you want to check out actually one of those psychoanalytic interpretations, if you look on the playlist, I think you can find them. There's several of those as well. But I appreciate y'all. And I guess I will see you again. My links are below if any of you want to leave a tip. And thank you to my mods. Let me just make sure that I have not missed any big comments. Do not think I have. All right, everybody. So see you later. Bye-bye.